Hello again, everyone. I am Chris Scherer, and this is the Citizen Sports Weekly for Wednesday, January 5th, 2022. Happy New Year, folks. We made it to another year. Robert Harding, Justin
Shearer's
Ritzel.
beard did not.
Actually, the beard did survive the new year, but it went away on Monday, so it's been gone for 2 days. I said when the Dolphins.
And why did it go away, Chris?
Because I said when the Dolphins lost, it would go because I had stopped shaving in the beginning of November and the Dolphins kept winning. Now, it's a complete coincidence and it became a superstition basically. But when I said when they lost, the beard was going to go bye-bye. And guess what? They lost on Sunday and it went bye-bye. So I am clean shaven for the first time in 2 months. So there we go.
But surprise, they play a good team and they lose by a lot.
You know something, you're right, and they played like absolute garbage, and they deserve to get trounced, and that's all I'm going to say about that. You know, we'll talk about when we get to the off season. I'll go into more details about my thoughts about my football team. So, all right.
It's funny. There's that tradition in the NHL. Playoff beards.
Right.
Everyone keeps their playoff beard growing until they get eliminated from the playoffs. That's kind of like essentially what you did, Chris. The Dolphins playoff were, November and December because they can't make the real playoffs, and then they and you had to shave. So it's, I think it works out.
All righty. Yeah. Okay. How am I going to reply to that? So yeah, it was a regular season beard, not a playoff beard. So there we go. All right. So we have three NFL topics, and then we're going to do our NFL picks. First topic: Aaron Rodgers, the Green Bay Packers quarterback who Justin worships, is basically the favorite for the MVP in the NFL. Okay, it's supposedly the favorite, but there is is this guy a writer? Is he a radio? I guess he was on a radio show. His name's Hub Arkush, and I've heard the name someplace before. But he basically said he is not voting for Aaron Rodgers for MVP because of the drama that Rodgers did in the offseason. Now, I think Arkush is from Chicago, and that's another thing that, obviously Green Bay and Chicago are big rivals. But, I mean, look, I don't have an MVP vote, okay? But if I did, I could disagree with Aaron Rodgers about a lot of things. But the one thing you cannot deny is that he's had a heck of a season. And arguably he is the MVP. You can debate whether you think maybe Joe Burrow should be the MVP or Josh Allen or Tom Brady or Cooper Kupp. There's a lot of players that you could throw into the MVP conversation. Ultimately, I think Aaron Rodgers is the MVP. But to not vote for him because of the off-season stuff, I mean, I'm sorry. That's just a really foolish rationale for denying a person a vote. I think it's ludicrous. It's inane. And I'm not saying the guy should be stripped of his vote because I think that's extreme. Because I think when we start saying that, oh, you didn't vote for this guy because of these reasons, you lose your vote automatically, I think that sets a slippery slope. But this guy is he's not voting for Rodgers for the wrong reasons, and I think he needs to be called out publicly. Although I will say I give him credit for saying something publicly, and those were his reasons, because he could have hidden him behind anonymity when he submitted his vote. So I give him credit for at least stepping up and being public about it. But it's a bad reason. So, Justin, you're the resident Packers fan. Your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I am a Packers fan, obviously, and I wouldn't say I'm an Aaron Rodgers worshiper. I am a big fan of him on the football field. But this year is honestly, it's been a complicated kind of season as a fan of his and as a fan of the team. Because it's like being stuck between a rock and a hard place where you love watching the guy play. I've supported him for 15 years as a quarterback, and you'd like to think, hey, off the field, your views on things align, and that's not the case. And maybe that's my own fault for putting him on a pedestal, because I think my problem is I don't agree with his vaccination comments. For the past several, couple months. I don't agree about his thoughts on woke mobs and cancel culture. Like, I just think those are just trendy phrases to use. I think it's a bunch of nonsense. If Aaron Rodgers was a victim of cancel culture, he wouldn't be appearing on State Farm commercials anymore. He wouldn't be given a weekly platform to express these nonsensical views that he has on this specific subject. Where I have a huge issue with this is for someone to say, I don't agree with what Aaron Rodgers did over the offseason. I think he's a bad guy, and I think he hurt his team. Well, if we were going to give MVPs based on, what the morality police think, then we should just rewrite sports history. How is it a prerequisite that every single great athlete also needs to be a fantastic, upstanding human being off the field to receive any kind of recognition? Because there's a lot of guys in the Hall of Fame in every sport that were clearly not good human beings, and no one talked about it then. Did Aaron Rodgers hurt his team during the offseason? Well, I don't know. They're the number one seed in the NFC. They have the best record in the NFL. It seems like they're doing just fine. Did his decision to not get vaccinated impact their ability to win or lose a game? Yeah, obviously it did. But guess what? He could have been vaccinated and still gotten COVID and been out for a game. So to just assume that would have had some giant trajectory on the season, let's talk about reality, which is his performance on the field, what he's done, and where the team is. I reference a couple other things, or I want to look back on a couple other things. Brett Favre, I think, has done a lot of things off the field that make him not the greatest person, between tax fraud, between sending pictures of his groin area to a female employee of the New York Jets, between the infidelity that's been written about ad nauseum with his wife. You could go on a million things. Brett Favre missed an entire offseason, the Packers Super Bowl year in '96, because he was in rehab for painkillers. Should we strip Brett Favre of his 1996 NFL MVP because he was a big distraction of the team? Well, no, obviously we're not going to do that. And granted, that was 25 years ago, and our opinions on things, how we cover things, has evolved. But, no one talks about that. Are we going to strip Tom Brady of his Super Bowl MVP in 2014 because we had to talk about deflated footballs for 2 weeks? Wasn't that a distraction to his team? Didn't that conversation hurt the Patriots, off the field? You could make a case that it did, but they still won, and he still won MVP. So it's a slippery slope when you start talking about, oh, this guy's a jerk and this guy's a bad person. We don't know. No one except his teammates and the people in the Green Bay facilities really know about Aaron Rodgers. And you can make an argument even they don't really know the true Aaron Rodgers. So to pontificate on whether he's a good person or not, I think is stupid. You got to go by what he's done on the field, and what he's done on the field this year has, been unmatched. While you can make the case for Tom Brady and all those other guys, whatever, he's been the best quarterback. He's been the most valuable quarterback. He's been the best player, and he should be the MVP. It's unfortunate that people like to kind of insert themselves into this conversation, which is what this guy has clearly done. I don't agree with it, but I also don't agree that he should lose his vote, because he has the right to his opinion, but we don't agree with it. So,
go ahead, Robert.
I don't know who this stooge from Chicago is. Never heard of him before. But, look, I have a lot of problems with Aaron Rodgers, but it seems like this guy's more upset because Rodgers owns the Bears. And, he clearly owns some real estate in this guy's head too, since he's willing to, say that all Rodgers is this bad guy and I'm not going to vote for him. I think that's, not going to prevent Rodgers from getting the MVP vote. I think before this, there was some chatter that there might be some voters who decide to withhold their vote or not vote for Rodgers because of his COVID positions. And look, I'll preface this by saying, over the past couple months, Rodgers has said things that are patently false about COVID and vaccines in particular. Yes, he's entitled to his decision, his opinion about the vaccine. If he doesn't want to get it, that is his choice. but he's not entitled to his own facts about the vaccine, the effectiveness of the vaccine, how it'll affect, various, things that he seems concerned with. He said, for example, that, he wants to be a father one day, and he's heard things about the vaccine affecting, his ability to have children. I'm fully vaccinated. I got a daughter. So, don't worry, Rodgers, your Johnson will be fine. Other than that, I think, with this, I just wrote a column about this actually. And I make the comparison to what happened with Terrell Owens. And I think it's an appropriate comparison because the voters, in this case, it was more than one voter. It was a group of Hall of Fame voters that banded together, apparently, whether that was purposeful or not. It seems like it was, and said that we're going to keep Terrell Owens, T.O., out of the Hall of Fame because we don't like what he did off the field. T.O., by the way, had one of the greatest, still does, one of the greatest careers for a wide receiver in NFL history. If you look at the books, he's right up there with Jerry Rice. He's right up there with Randy Moss in a lot of those categories. I think, before this generation of receivers, we'd say those three are the top three. Randy Moss, I don't believe had to wait. Jerry Rice sure as hell didn't have to wait. T.O., they made wait until his third year of eligibility. That's a bunch of BS. And I think to this general point, because we've seen this in baseball, no matter what you think about the steroid era, I think this idea of blanket voting just because you don't like something is ridiculous. I think you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. But this idea that voters, whose job it is to consider whether a player's on-the-field performance warrants recognition, whether it's for an MVP award, whether it's for the Hall of Fame, the idea that they will say, oh, no, that's not just our criteria. It is our duty to carry out our own agendas as to what's right and what's wrong. That is also a bunch of BS. And if that's the way that things are going to be, then yes, they should lose their vote. I think in the case of this guy from Chicago, he's clearly upset because Rodgers just totally rolls over his hometown team. Is that what you want out of a voter for the NFL's one of the NFL's most prestigious individual honors? I would say no. I don't think it's I've seen plenty of sports writers from Buffalo who the Bills have been owned by Tom Brady for 20 years. These guys will vote for Tom Brady for different awards. So either you're a writer who can approach this job objectively and put aside any sort of personal bias, or you're not, and you shouldn't have a Hall of Fame vote in that instance. I think that's that's something that we need to consider here, is that these Hall of Fame voters, these sports writers that are responsible for the individual honors every year, if they're going to insert their agendas, they should absolutely lose their votes, because they're not doing their sports justice if they're out there wielding their own agendas and potentially swinging some votes. We haven't seen that too much, but the TO one is an example. Enough banded together and really ruined his what should have been a first ballot Hall of Fame career, and instead it was derailed because of a bunch of people with agendas. I don't want to see that happen to Rodgers, despite all his nonsense about COVID and stuff. I think he's absolutely wrong, but his play on the field, it's indisputable. He is the MVP. I think there's only a few other players you could argue warrant consideration, but I think he's a shoo-in to repeat as the most valuable player.
All right, our next topic. This is a quick one for me. Ben Roethlisberger played his last home game as a Steeler. It's pretty much a done deal, but we know he's going to retire after this year. So his last home game, he won on Monday night against the hapless Browns. And the question is Ben Roethlisberger a Hall of Famer? Yes, easily. He's got 2 rings. He's got the numbers. he was a difference maker. I mean, look, I understand longevity. Some people are like, oh, he just played and accumulated numbers. Ben Roethlisberger was one of the best quarterbacks in the history of the NFL, easily, and deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. First ballot, slam dunk. Go ahead, Robert.
I don't think it's that cut and dry, Chris, but I was kind of curious about this because I know Pro Football Reference has what they call a Hall of Fame monitor, and they have it for quarterbacks. And the average Hall of Fame QB has a Hall of Fame monitor score of 104. Roethlisberger's is at a 99. So on that level, he would be a borderline pick. And I know I know what's going through your brain right now. Oh,
You
these
do.
whippersnappers with these numbers and
Analytics.
But this is based on his statistics, other factors as well as championships, all these other things. I would say, and I think it's right to bring up this other name when we talk about this, and that's Eli Manning. They were both in the same class, and they both won 2 Super Bowls. And we've talked about this on the show before. Eli Manning, is he a Hall of Famer? And I've made the argument that he's not. I think Roethlisberger is a Hall of Fame. I don't think it's as clear cut as some people would argue, but when you look at his record, this is a guy that was consistently a winner in Pittsburgh. He has those 2 Super Bowls. He led his team to another that they didn't win. He has been on the field. He's played through injuries. This is a guy that's, one of the toughest quarterbacks to ever play the game. And, when you look at his whole record, I think you say, okay, this guy's a Hall of Famer. Where Eli loses out is that, the Giants had so many lackluster seasons with him at the helm that you look at that resume and say, well, yeah, he's got the 2 Super Bowls like Roethlisberger, but he also has these seasons where they didn't win and they didn't make the playoffs. Roethlisberger, they, even in the seasons when they didn't make the playoffs, they were winning. I think for me, if I had a vote, I would put Big Ben in, but I don't think it's as cut and dry as some people would think it is. I think a lot of people are automatically saying, oh, he's won 2 Super Bowls, lock. No, because when you look at his stats, he's thrown for over 400 touchdowns, but you look at some of the other players in his generation, and he doesn't have an All-Pro designation to his name. Yes, he's made some Pro Bowls, but what's the Pro Bowl now? It's not what it used to be. And you look at the individual awards. A guy like Rodgers is on his way to 4 MVPs, and what does Roethlisberger have? He's got Offensive Rookie of the Year, which is something, but certainly not an MVP award. So, again, I think he's borderline. If I had a vote, I'd put him in. But I think it's going to be one of those things where they probably spend a little time talking about him, and potentially he won't be a first ballot Hall of Famer. We'll see.
He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. I'll literally bet money on it. Justin, go ahead.
I think if you want to make an argument against Ben, it's just that it's kind of like the same idea as like why it's really tough for a lot of these wide receivers to get in, is because it's just there's such a stockpile of great talented players. Like guys like Torrey Holt are still waiting for the call because there was just so many guys who had to get in ahead of them, and that's I think that's what's gonna maybe hamper Roethlisberger from becoming a first ballot guy. Is Phil Rivers and Eli both retired a year before him, or in Eli's case a couple years. Are those guys going to get in? It's just there's just such a backlog of quarterbacks who are going to be in that conversation with Roethlisberger. I mean, Drew Brees retired last year, so he's going to kind of be in that same time frame. He'll obviously be a first ballot guy, but yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation. When this was presented as one of our topics, I kind of, was one of those people Robert was talking about, like, oh yeah, no, what are we talking about here? He's obviously a Hall of Famer. Yeah. But yeah, you could definitely parse through some of the statistics and say, like, where is his kind of year in and year out excellence? when you look at the body of work, the numbers he compiled, he's right up there with the best of them, over 400 touchdowns, 63,000 yards. I think, I kind of put together a list of like, who are the top 10 quarterbacks of the Super Bowl era. I think there's 8 or 9 guys who just 100% absolutely have to be on that list. And then for me, Roethlisberger's kind of in that group of like, 3 or 4 guys that you can make an argument as top 10 of the last, 55, 56 years. But it could go either way. For me, yeah, I think the thing that separates him is one, he was one of a kind in terms of how he played quarterback. Big Ben, bodies just rolling off him. He was impossible to take down and get sacks off of, and he continued to make plays and all that. No one was quite like him in that respect. I think it probably hurt him a little bit in terms of his longevity, along with kind of a unwillingness to take care of his body to the extent that some of these other quarterbacks have, like Brady and Rodgers, really extending their career. And the other thing with Ben is like just these last couple of years, the way he's dropped off. I think unfortunately for him, that's going to leave maybe a little bit of a lasting memory. Like man, he was just so bad at the end. It's going to be tough to separate that from some people, but listen, he's, to his credit, yeah. I don't think you can solely attribute the Steelers' success over the last 15 years to him. Certainly early in his career, he benefited from having a great defense. But I think we need to be honest here and say, like, hey, the 2010s, for the most part, the Steelers did not have great defenses. They were great because of Ben Roethlisberger when he was healthy and available to play. They were great because of Le'Veon Bell. And they were great because of a guy we're about to talk about in a minute, Antonio Brown. But listen, he's a great player. I think he'll get into the Hall of Fame eventually, even if it's on the first ballot, and certainly a memorable career.
Yeah. All I'll say is the finish up is that he never had a losing season. So that's pretty incredible to do in 17 years. Never had one losing season. So, all right, our last topic before our picks, Antonio Brown of the Buccaneers. He still is a Buccaneer, I guess. They haven't cut him yet, but he had an outburst. I guess Arians asked him to go back in the game in the third quarter, and he said he was hurt, and it all went downhill from there. He took off his jersey and his shoulder pads and his T-shirt. He looked like Ned Braden out of Slapshot, if you remember that movie, guys. Stripping down to just his pants and running in the end zone and yelling to the crowd. And look, we all know Antonio Brown has issues with his mental health, and we're not going to make jokes about that because it's not funny. And the question for the show does this affect the Bucs playoff run? I mean, look, you're losing a great receiver like Antonio Brown. Yes, it does affect them from that standpoint, but you've got one less person in the locker room who can cause issues. And I think from that standpoint, it's addition by subtraction. So, the Buccaneers, are they as good as they were last year? Well, I guess we're going to find out pretty soon in the playoffs. They still have weapons with Evans and Gronkowski and Leonard Fournette. So, they'll miss Antonio Brown, but I think they can definitely get to the conference championship game at least without him. So we'll see what happens. But I think Antonio Brown, he needs help. I hope he's going to get help. That's ultimately the most important thing, is this guy can have a normal life, so to speak, and his mental health is okay and everything. So ultimately, that's what you want to see as a fan, as a human being, is to get this guy, get his mind straight. So, Justin, your thoughts about Antonio Brown?
Well, I do think that his absence is going to hamper the Bucs, offensive capabilities in the playoffs, because it's not just the fact that he's not going to play, but think of who they've already lost. Chris Godwin's not going to play. They're really down to one reliable wide receiver, which is Mike Evans. And you look at kind of what these other NFC teams have to offer. You take Mike Evans out of the game, you're relying on a still effective but old and injury prone Rob Gronkowski, and then you're hoping that Leonard Fournette can kind of continue to recapture that playoff magic that he seems to have every year. But I think the margin for error for Tampa Bay on a play-to-play basis is a lot smaller now. And their defense is not the unit it was last year. They're really banged up. A lot of guys that were great last year, particularly, their secondary really came together in the playoffs last year. They're banged up. They haven't played as well this year. So I do think, and this is probably going to come back to bite me in like 3 weeks, but I do think they're a bit ripe for the picking here. And Antonio Brown showed us who he was years ago. All I can say is, what do you expect from a pig but a grunt? Okay. This is a laundry list of issues that he's had. Serious legal allegations have been against him. And that didn't stop teams from continuing to bring him in. I want to take aim really at the enablers, because Antonio Brown should have been out of the NFL 8 chances ago. All that nonsense with the Raiders, okay, you could say that was a bit of a strike too. Even going back before that, when he supposedly got unhappy with not being named Steelers MVP. He threw a shoe or a football or something at Ben Roethlisberger. That kind of led to him leaving Pittsburgh. And that's all kind of relatively minor stuff compared to what's gone on the last couple of years. Faking your vaccination card, that's a legal offense. Some of the off-field sexual allegations that have been going on in court, those are serious offenses. And yet, Bruce Arians, who said, we're giving this guy 1 chance, and if he screws up, he's gone. Well, he got 3 chances, and that, it took this nonsense for you guys to finally say that's enough. Tom Brady, Tom Brady had a really, I guess, nice answer in his post-game press conference about Antonio Brown and how we should be compassionate and understand he needs help and all that stuff. And yes, I think in a vacuum, that's right. That's the right way to approach it. But hey, Tom, maybe the best way for Antonio Brown to get help is for you to not continue to force the teams you play for to bring him in and give him chances to parade around the football field because he's got great talent. Maybe being away from football is the best way he needs help. And in that way, you didn't help him. So, I think Antonio Brown obviously deserves a lot of criticism for just everything. But we need to also take a long, hard look at the people who allowed these situations to continue happening. And that starts with the organization itself and the one player who has time and time again stuck by him for reasons unknown. So we'll see where this goes from here. But they're only keeping him on the roster because they're afraid that another team in the NFC, the AFC wants to pick him up. And that really goes to a larger problem, which is the winning at all costs mentality. Hey guys, I understand that this is a profession. You guys make a lot of money for being successful on the field. But at what point are we just selling our soul here to win football games? That's kind of what it comes down to me.
Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, this is all just bizarre because as we get further removed from this, more information comes out, and it sounds like he is legitimately injured. He's got this nagging ankle injury, and it seems like he's not healthy enough to play, and he doesn't think he's healthy enough to play. But they wanted him out there. I think, did he handle it the best? If there's that kind of disagreement, absolutely not. I mean, it's embarrassing for him. It's embarrassing for the Bucs. Just think if they don't win that game, what the storylines are. Even so, they barely beat the Jets of all teams. I think that regarding the question at hand, this does hurt the Bucs. I mean, Antonio Brown was a huge contributor to their team in the second half last season. I think he caught a touchdown in the Super Bowl. I just looked up his stats. He played 8 regular season games with the Bucs in 2020, and he had 41 catches in that time. That's decent performance for only playing half the season and coming into a team, halfway through, and it shows just how much natural talent this guy has. But he squandered it. A lot of it has been his own fault. Whether you're looking at what happened in Pittsburgh, his brief stint in New England, and now Tampa Bay,
Oakland,
and Oakland. Yeah,
remember Oakland?
Yeah,
the helmet,
yeah, that was
the foot.
That was an added part of his story for sure. So I think for the Bucs, this does hurt them. They're without Chris Godwin, and he was obviously Brady's go-to guy this year. Godwin really, I think, emerged as his favorite target, and he's out for the year with a ACL injury. Brown comes back. They presumed that he was healthy. Clearly, he wasn't, and he could have been a big contributor for them down the playoff stretch. Now, Brady has to lean on some guys that have less experience. And, judging by the Jets game, they might be okay, but they're going to be going up against a better team than the Jets, that's for sure. So in terms of the Bucs playoff chances, I thought going in, even before this, that it would be tough for them to get past the Packers, still do. Not to mention that there's other teams that they certainly could have tough times against. The Rams, notably, and certainly even some of those lower seeded teams that could surprise people. I would not rule out the Bucs being one and done in the playoffs. Just how their season trajectory is going. So I think that this could affect them quite a bit as they head into the playoffs.
All right, we'll get to our picks. Quick little recap. Last week, Justin 3-1. He was our champion of the week. So congratulations, Justin. Robert and I were 2-2. So not middling weeks for Robert and I. So let's get right to it. Our first game, Dallas Cowboys at the Philadelphia Eagles. Cowboys are 7-point road favorites. Boy, that is a big spread. And I've been waffling on this one, but I'm not going to say who I picked just yet. Robert, who do you like?
What a stooge. This guy's unbelievable. This game's a tough one for me because I think when you look at the Cowboys in the first half of the season, this team looked like a legitimate contender. That the offense was clicking on all cylinders, that defense was playing well. I think the defense to some degree is still playing well, but a lot of questions for me about what's going on with Dak and that offense. It just doesn't look right. They put up a lot of points against Washington, but that's a bum team anyway. They can't even get the railings right in that stadium, let alone their football team. So the Eagles they've surprised some people. They got that rushing attack going. Jalen Hurts, I think, has really come on and shown that he's a legit NFL quarterback. I'm picking him to cover in this one, which I'm sure Sheeran, now that he knows my pick, just to play it safe to protect that little lead of his, he will go with the Eagles as well.
Well, Robert, guess what? You're wrong.
Oh boy!
As a matter of fact, I originally was going to pick the Eagles. I had put my C next to it, and then I started thinking about it a couple minutes ago, and I decided to go with the Cowboys. So, nope, I am not doing that just to protect my lead. Okay, I am taking the Cowboys to cover the -7, and I know that's going to be. I know I should have my head examined because I know they're missing some players. I know that their best young defensive player, whose name escapes me right now, is out because of COVID. The rookie of the year, the best, arguably maybe the defensive MVP, and I'm drawing a blank on his name.
Micah Parsons.
Thank you. But I think the Cowboys' offense is going to be the key here, and I think they want to get a tune-up before the playoffs. I still think that they would like to have that 2 seed. They have a chance for it. So I like them to cover the -7. It's a big spread. I know I'm going to regret this. But I'm going to pick the Cowboys to cover the -7. Go ahead, Justin.
Eagles have been like a really nice kind of story this year that no one's talking about. I don't know how many times they've been on our pick 4. But you're talking about a team that entered the season and everyone viewed them in a huge rebuilding mode. I still think they kind of are in a rebuilding mode. It really depends on what your thoughts are on Jalen Hurts as their future quarterback, but I don't think you can look at this season as anything other than a success for that team that was downright terrible last year and didn't really have much hope that they were going to be any better this year. They traded away Zach Ertz, who was a longtime staple for that team, and they haven't really missed a beat. They're borderline top 10 in offense. Their defense has been a top 10 unit based on traditional stats. I think, they've hung with a couple good teams. They've had no issues putting up, 27, 28, 30 points every week. They're going to be an interesting team, in the playoffs to see if they can kind of knock off one of these 5, NFC powers just based on the uniqueness of how they play offense. Their dominant running attack and their athletic quarterback who runs around a lot. It wouldn't surprise me to see them give one of these teams a little bit of trouble. I'm not ready to say they're going to win a playoff game yet, but as far as this week's game, yeah, Dallas, hey, what did I say? I said they haven't played a good quarterback all year. They played one last week and they lost. So I'm not ready to put Jalen Hurts in that conversation among the good quarterbacks, but I think he'll give them enough trouble. And I like the Eagles to, while probably lose, I think this is a 3 or 4 point game. So Eagles.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I waffled. I mean, if you look at my piece of paper here, it's got crossouts on. I've gone back and forth, but I'm going to stick with the Cowboys. I'm going to regret it, but I'm going to stick with the Cowboys. Our next game, the Steelers at the Ravens. Ravens are 5.5 point favorites. Is Lamar Jackson playing in this game? Do we have any idea whether he's playing? No idea. No idea if he's playing. Okay. All right.
Well, it is Wednesday, so we should get some information today.
Because that would influence my pick, but whatever. We got to pick with what we.
John Harbaugh did say, I believe yesterday, that there is a chance he will play this week. Which if they want to make the playoffs, which they have an outside shot of doing so, I think they're going to need Lamar Jackson on the field.
Yeah, and how healthy will he be? So, all right, go ahead, Justin. Who do you like in this game?
I don't think Lamar Jackson's going to play, and I don't know if it matters. I'll go with the Ravens.
Going with the Ravens. Okay. Robert.
That wasn't meant to be a slight at Lamar Jackson, by the way. I just think that, the Steelers kind of had their rah-rah game on Monday Night Football, and that was Big Ben's send-off. And, I don't think they really have a whole lot to play for, even if there's a minuscule chance they could get in. So Ravens are home. Not that really matters a lot this season, but I think they'll get it done and get revenge for the controversial 2-point attempt earlier this season.
Mm-hmm. Robert, go ahead.
These two teams have a history of playing close games, and I think this 5.5 point spread for the Ravens is pretty large. Even if Lamar Jackson's playing, I think the Steelers will keep it close. So I'm going to ride with the Big Ben as he rides off into the sunset.
Well, I'll tell you, I've been going back and forth on this game too, and I've flip-flopped, but I'm going to go with the Ravens. I think that Lamar Jackson, if he does play, will be the difference maker. He might be, a little hobbled there, but I still think he gets it done. And I've flipped on both these games, going different from what Robert is. So Robert can't accuse me of like automatically going with him to protect my lead. I've been changing, but I'm going with the Ravens here. Rivalry game, and Steelers coming off a short week, division game, all that other fun surism that you love so much, Robert. All right, our next game is the San Francisco 49ers at the Los Angeles Rams. Rams are 4.5 point favorites. Robert, who do you like?
This is an interesting game because the Rams do have something to play for in this one. This isn't just a throwaway game for them, even though they're in the playoffs. You're playing for seeding. The Niners are. It's interesting because the Eagles are actually seated below the Niners right now. The Eagles have clinched a playoff spot. The Niners have not. So that both teams are kind of playing for different reasons in this one. But I just like the Rams better. The Niners. The situation at quarterback. With Garoppolo, he's banged up. They got Trey Lance in there. I know he had a decent game last week in relief, but he's going up against a better defense, this week, and I think that could pose problems for him. I think the Rams will take this one. I think NFC West battle. I'm going to ride with the Rams at home.
All right, Justin, who do you like in this game?
Well, this is a continuation of the Kyle Shanahan owns Sean McVay rivalry. Yes, as Robert mentioned, I think Garoppolo, his status is up in the air. Trey Lance, I think did some okay things last week. It took him a little while to get going, but at the end of the day, had some nice numbers. And the Niners still, I think they could back into the playoffs with a loss potentially, but yeah, they would like to win this and secure their spot the right way. They still have the potential to run their offense, run the ball control kind of offense, keep Matt Stafford and his interception-prone right arm off the field. And I think they will do that enough to make this a 3-point game. So I will take the I will take the 49ers against the spread.
Okay. Well, on this game, I didn't waffle. I picked the Rams, and I'm staying with the Rams for some of the reasons Robert said. They are playing for some seeding, and I think that they get it done. They've been playing better recently, so I like the Rams to cover the 4.5.
All right. Wait, hold on, guys. Matt Stafford just threw another pick six. Just wanted to get that in there.
Our last game is arguably could be the best game of the week. This is a game that's going to determine who goes to the playoffs and who goes home. The Los Angeles Chargers are 3-point favorites at the Las Vegas Raiders. Robert, who do you like?
Boy, this is an interesting one. I think because it's been framed as the team wins and gets in, but I think with potentially the Raiders, I think maybe both teams.
There's a tie.
Yeah, there's ways that they can get in even without one team winning. Even if they lose, a team could still get in. So this is a tough one because the Raiders certainly have the talent to pull this one out, and Derek Carr, when he's playing up to his level, he could steal this one. But for me, what it comes down to is Justin Herbert. This is the game where you show that you're one of the bright young stars in the NFL. That Raiders defense shouldn't scare him too much. I think he'll have a big day in a meaningful game. The win and get in should be the mentality. I think Herbert lights it up, and I'm taking the Chargers.
All right, Justin.
I don't really understand the whole if they tie, they could both get in. I don't really understand that because the Colts are pretty clearly there's 5 teams that have clinched in the AFC. The Colts are clearly going to beat the Jaguars, which will be the 6th, and then you'll have 2 teams fighting for one spot. So I'm not quite sure how that.
I think it's if something else happens in another game that if it goes that way, that the Chargers and Raiders could get in with a tie. I mean, it's unlikely, but still.
I mean, all that is to be said. If the Colts win, it's kind of all a moot point, right? I mean, Colts win, they're 10-7. Both these teams are 9-7. A tie wouldn't get both of them in. So I don't know. There's smarter people than me that can go try and figure that all out. What's funniest to me is this is the only kind of game this week, week 18 now, that is a true win and get in scenario for both teams that are playing, which just makes me think that this regular season was too long. And I get that the NFL didn't increase the regular season because they wanted to have a more competitive final week. They did it because of money, but I think you're starting to see the downside of this extra game is that, well, it kind of gave all these other good teams an extra week to separate themselves and kind of make the playoff situation less dramatic. So that's going to be an interesting kind of side effect to watch over the next couple of years, is just how much this week 18 really matters. For these two teams, it matters. Win and get in. And I think the Chargers, come on, you guys know me. You think I'm going to pick against the Chargers? Be bad for the brand. I'm not going to do that. Go Chargers.
Well, guess what? I've got the Chargers too. I think Joey Bosa is going to have a big game. And I think, like Robert said, Justin Herbert, this is his chance to really shine in the national spotlight. And even though the Chargers have made some really head-scratching decisions, Brandon Staley, kick a field goal once in a while. It's not going to hurt you. Take the points. It's, discretion is the better part of valor. I think the Chargers get it done. The Raiders always find a way to implode. And, there was another DWI arrest with the Raiders. I mean, it's just, I understand the Raiders are the Raiders. They've always been this way going back to the 70s when I was a kid. But, this is ridiculous. And I think the Raiders, they're going to have that typical letdown at the end, and they'll head into the offseason looking for a new coach. So I'm going with the Chargers. So, all right, gentlemen, that is it. Wrapping it up. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll see you next week.